What's up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo football podcast. Ryan Talbot, Matt Parrino in the house here for our staple show. And Ryan, it's kind of a crazy, out of the blue, big Bills Day,
Yeah.
news day. Like, I don't think anybody was expecting the news that dropped today. The Bills are going to be on Hard Knocks this summer. We're going to get into that. We had a great insider question as well, and then we'll maybe take a question or two on the live chat. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. Excited for a long weekend. We have Monday off coming up here. Looking forward to that. What about you?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to OTAs starting next week. I know a lot of teams, like if you see the Jets reporters were hard at work today. Zach Rosenblatt, I follow him over on X from The Athletic. And I think a lot of Bills fans are probably sitting there like, where are the Bills? Where is the Bills OTAs going? They eliminated one of the weeks. So they're only going to be doing 2 weeks of open OTAs, and that starts next week. We're excited to roll up our sleeves and get after it in Orchard Park next week. But I got to tell you, Shout is brought to you by the National Comedy Center, located in Jamestown, New York. The National Comedy Center is the perfect day trip or weekend trip for the entire family. One of the most interactive museums in the country. This is a museum experience like no other, featuring comedy's biggest hits and greatest legends. A day filled with laughter, and we cannot wait to get to the Comedy Center. And everybody watching Shout should head out there if you can make time for a trip, and let them know that you heard about it on Shout.
Yeah, make a day trip, head out there for a weekend. Unbelievable exhibits there. And before you know it, Matt and I will be there, and we hope a lot of the Bills Mafia joins us.
Thank you for making us a part of your Wednesday night. This is kind of like the quiet part of the offseason, right? Like we'll move through this last leg of the race here, and then it'll be that real long period where people are kind of just settled in and just like, get me to football, right? Like get me to training camp. But we'll talk about a bunch of things. All right. Let's start with Hard Knocks. So first and foremost, I know a lot of people asked about, could the Bills have said, we don't want to be on the Hard Knocks? And I'm pretty sure they don't want to be on Hard Knocks. If you go back to training camp last year, I asked Brandon about it because Joe Shane and Brian Dable were on the in-season version of Hard Knocks, and the whole Saquon Barkley drama kind of came off. And I asked Brandon about it, and he's like, no, we don't want to be on Hard Knocks. Like, keep that away. But now, I mean, you really can't, right? Like they eliminated the rule where if you made the playoffs the previous season, you could request not to be in it. And so they get rid of that rule. You can, if you've been in any of the last 8 seasons, you can not be. If you have a first-year head coach, the Bills don't fall into any of those criteria. So
Right.
They have to do it. What's your first initial reaction to what this is going to be like?
So I can't remember if it was Rich Eisen or someone else that the Bills volunteered, and that was just per like a report that he put out there. But I think it's actually a genius move by the Bills. When would you rather do it, Matt? Training camp or the regular season if you're Buffalo? For me, training camp is the no-brainer. There's not the drama with the Bills. Yeah, I know James Cook wants a new deal, and there could be that element to it, but this is not a dysfunctional organization like the New York Giants. You're not going to see a lot of that drama played out. This is leading up to the regular season. It's 90 guys battling for jobs. There's going to be probably 30 shots of turkey burgers from St. John Fisher University. I'm going to do a Matt Parrino hair count every episode, see how many times I see in the background with those locks back there. So I think in terms of the choices, which way you would rather do it, training camp is the way to go if you're Buffalo. So I think if they really did volunteer for this, it makes perfect sense.
So I wanted to also have like a side conversation about this because I think there's some like heavy hitters, right? Like the main attractions that I think a lot of fans, even outside of Buffalo, will be excited about. Josh Allen, reigning MVP, duh, right? Then you have Deion Dawkins, who dancing at the NFL awards. He comes up out during Super Bowl week and says there should be an award for the greatest offensive lineman. And lo and behold, 4 months later, they voted on it in the NFL meetings. Now there is that award. So he's got a lot of cachet as well. And he's just the way he dresses and just his swagger. I think Deion Dawkins will be must-see TV. Keon Coleman, remember last year, like how much, people really talked about him after the draft. I could see him being a big part of people's excitement. Who's somebody on the roster that maybe fans aren't expecting, but could be one of the superstars of Hard Knocks, somebody that, becomes a household name once the entire NFL world gets a chance to kind of watch them up close? I have one idea. Now, as you sit here and think about it, it could be somebody that and my idea is somebody that I think Bills fans already are very aware of his personality and his antics. But once I think he's really shown to the world, I think he's going to be a little bit more of a household name. I don't want to give it away, but who are you thinking?
So in terms of this overall roster, the first name that comes to mind is Max Hairston. There's going to be a lot of cameras on the rookie, the first round pick. You saw the personality at the draft, dapping everyone up. I don't think he's going to be shy in front of the cameras here in Buffalo. That will be one of the big storylines this summer in terms of fighting for that cornerback 2 spot opposite Christian Benford. So that's definitely someone that comes to mind. Definitely not Matt Milano. I'm trying to think like position by position, guys that are like stone cold silent, like James Cook. Wouldn't make a lot of sense to me. So I think, Spencer Brown's going to be another one I think is going to be a big one for the camera too. He's going to be quite the personality. So there's 2 for me. What do you think?
I love the Spencer Brown one. And mine is a little bit different, but if I had it to do over again, I would have probably gone with Spencer Brown because, you go back to the end of the season. Remember he had that quote ahead of the Chiefs game where he was asked about like what it was going to feel like. And he's like, well, I'm either going to be celebrating with my buddies, or I'm going to have a 12-pack of beer and I'm going to be just drowning my sorrows. I mean, he is just like a walking quote. He's got a great energy to him. So I think Spencer Brown is going to be a great candidate for this. I think Ed Oliver, somebody that, has a personality, somebody that once you get around him, his press conferences are a roller coaster. Sometimes you'll get this, like the very like low key Ed Oliver. And then sometimes you'll get the really dialed up, fun, joking Ed Oliver. And I think you'll see that a lot early in training camp. For me, if you think about it, came onto the scene as the first draft pick for the Bills in 2017, kind of took Bills Mafia by storm. I think he was known, but I think Tre'Davious White in his new found like comfort in who he is as a player, where his career's at, being back in Buffalo, saying this was the place he really wanted to be after getting a chance to be in a couple other locations. I mean, you got LA, which is every player's dream from a location perspective, Baltimore, which was a Super Bowl contender. And this guy gets to the end of that season and says, get me back to Buffalo any way possible. This is a guy that has the Trey White Goalie Academy, right? Remember on the field a couple years ago, I think you shared this picture at one point after the Bills re-signed him, where the I can't remember the team they were playing, but the team's playbook goes on the field. Ravens. He runs it down and pretends like he's stealing the playbook really quick. I think he has a personality tailor-made for this TV show.
100%. And he's going to be part of the whole mentoring Max Hairston. He's going to have a lot of camera time when it comes to the Hard Knocks episode. So he's a great choice. Ed Oliver, you're right, has quite the personality. You're going to get a good mix here on this show. Obviously, the camera's going to be around Josh Allen as much as possible, which makes tons of sense. And I see someone here in the comments saying, can't imagine Sean McDermott is thrilled. I think McDermott really did open up a lot last year, and I think that he'll actually be pretty good on camera. I think he'll be okay with it at training camp as well. And then also in the comments, I did just see this as well on social media. Jim Irsay of the Colts owner passed away, so rest in peace rest in peace to him. I always love the ticket giveaways, the giveaways he did throughout the season to Colts fans. Seemed like someone that wanted to get all fans involved in coming to games. So may he rest in peace.
Yeah. Wow. I just saw that come across the ticker as well. So RIP to Jim Irsay, controversial owner, definitely in the news for multiple reasons over the years. But again, huge impact on the NFL and Indianapolis. I don't think the Bills are happy about this, right? Like, and I know, Sean, to your point, and when he talked about it last year and like the Hard Knocks experience and what that gives to fans, not only of that team, but across the NFL, a peek behind the curtain. This is going to be the kind of access that I don't think Bills fans have ever received. Like, you see the post-game locker room speech, right? But there's not a lot of content that comes out of training camp and meeting rooms. Like, there is, I mean, especially in the training camp version over the years, I remember some of the one-on-ones with Eberflus and Caleb Williams, where they were actually in his office and they were going back and forth on, you know, his development, different strategical stuff. That's the kind of stuff that the Bills keep so under wraps. And I think that's the part of it where they're not going to be over. I wonder how much access or how much editorial control the team gets in terms of saying like, okay, I don't want that out there because
Right.
that puts us at a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah, I think there will be a certain extent where the Bills say, here's what we want or here's what we don't want. And they have the right to that. I don't think it's just going to be whatever you get, you can put out there. There has to be certain things that are protected. But, you know, just going back to the original point, this is not like game planning for a team in season or anything like that. There's going to be 90 guys. A lot of guys are going to get cut. That'll probably be some of the scenes, letting players know when that time comes. If it's late in training camp, right before the start of the regular season, there's going to be a lot of elements to it. And while the Bills may not be thrilled in terms of those two choices, I really do like that. I see David here saying maybe they'll do something with WGR. I would almost bank on it. They'll play the clip and then they'll have Beane doing a morning interview or something with the guys from WGR, you know, breaking bread, making things all right in the world there again. There'll be a ton of different storylines and little elements that they'll have on Hard Knocks.
That is going to be so on the afterburner. We got the media golf tournament coming up in like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Jeremy and Brandon are probably going to laugh about it now in the aftermath of it all. I mean, and it is a cool storyline. And listen, it's still getting national burn. Like, when Brandon goes on any kind of media outlet, it's the first thing he's asked about. And the funny part of it is he hasn't really backtracked off of it at all, right? And I think the big pushback that Jeremy and Joe had was, you know, that was a very small piece of what they were talking about. And I think as you sit here, we can have a conversation about the wide receiver room, right? But like, the Bills don't have, this is the one area like where I'm higher on the Bills wide receiver group than most. But like, if you were to poke a hole in what they have, and I'm not saying that they could have done more financially, availability, all those kinds of things, they don't have a bona fide number one. And if you look at the Super Bowl champ from last year, I mean, do they win that Super Bowl without A.J. Brown? Like, that offense was floundering for a big chunk of early part of that game. A couple mistakes by the Chiefs. It stayed close, and then the floodgates kind of opened. A.J. Brown does so much for his quarterback. They also have another bona fide stud receiver in Devonta Smith and some other weapons, Dallas Goedert, a tight end that they know how to utilize, Saquon Barkley, one of the best backs in the league. They have a lot of weapons, but I think that piece of it, finding Josh Allen, that 1A option, Brian Thomas Jr. trading up last year's draft. I know I've said it multiple times. I'm like a broken record, but I do think that if that's something that you want the Bills to do, I do think that that's an okay take to have.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that is an okay take to have. And question from David, do we know when the coverage starts and finishes? I would think late July.
August 4th.
August 4th. Look at that, man.
The first airing is August 5th, and I believe it airs over the course of 5 to 6 episodes, if I'm not mistaken.
So they'll start filming, though, probably when training camp begins.
Oh, yeah. They'll be out there. They'll probably be at Fisher before even the first day.
That's true.
Before, all cut in, probably get them moving in, early meetings, all that kind of stuff. So they'll probably be moving out to the dorms well before us.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And like you just said, August 4th for the first episode. So it should be a good time when it comes to watching them back on HBO Max and seeing, I don't know, it's just going to be different because I've watched the last few years and I've always thought, what would it be like for Buffalo to do this? Because I never thought it was going to happen. And lo and behold, it's going to occur.
Well, you make the playoffs 5 straight years. You build one of the best rivalries in the game with the darling of the NFL, and then, oh, by the way, you have the MVP, reigning MVP, and all of a sudden Hard Knocks comes calling. It is training camp and preseason. So if you remember, the Bills were actually featured on an episode last year because Chicago came in their second preseason game to play the Bills. So there was some Bills stuff on that episode. So you'll see this all the way through the preseason. And David says, "Will you guys be on?" You'll see us in the background, I would imagine, for interviews and stuff like that. And there's one more thing on the Hard Knocks thing before we get to one of our big topic of the week. Well, I guess this is the big topic of the week since we started the show with it. But for the fans that are like annoyed about this, like, where do we fall on? Because I do think it has the potential to be distraction. I do agree with you from earlier in the show that it's something they're knocking off before they ever get to the regular season. But is it something where maybe you don't want the door open inside the building, if you will, with this kind of intimate look behind the scenes at, personalities, tendencies? I don't know. Is there anything that you think other teams can glean off of watching this over the years that we've watched? I thought the year the Jets were on, I gleaned the fact that I just thought I never would have trusted inside the organization or opponents Robert Saleh in a big time game. Right. Because I just didn't feel like he had a good grasp of his locker room. Same thing with Mike McDaniel, the in-season. Yeah. I mean, some of those speeches that he gave to the team in that season were horrible.
Yeah, I don't see any of those issues obviously coming to light with the Bills. As you mentioned, they've been a perennial playoff team. They're the AFC Championship this past year. We know that McDermott, has their respect, has their attention. This roster is just as good as it ever was. So I don't think you're going to say anything like that. And even if you are annoyed right now by this news, as soon as that first episode is streaming live, you're going to be tuning in most likely. And then that annoyance is going to go to, oh, this is fascinating. You're going to learn some new things most likely as they pull back the curtain. There will probably be roster evaluations where they're talking about the final few roster spots. And that's going to be fun because we talk about that leading all the way up to the end of August when we're doing our 53-man roster projections. And now we're going to actually probably get to hear the Bills talk about, oh, so-and-so needs a really big last preseason game or a strong end to training camp. So there's going to be some elements that I think fans and media alike probably didn't have access to before, and it's going to be unique from that perspective.
Jason asks, what if Cook doesn't even show up for camp? That would be a nightmare for Beane and McDermott. I think they do a good job. I will say, first and foremost, from a team perspective, that's something that the Bills don't want, right? Like, they don't want to have to deal with like a holdout, like that type of situation. But it's also something that you're just going to have to deal with if that ends up being the case, because you've decided not to pay him. You've decided to go into this last year, put the business on the back burner. Now, they have in the past, I can't remember. I'll have to go back and maybe I'll do this for an episode this offseason. There was a deal that I think was finally ironed out, like in training camp, or something that we thought wasn't going to happen until the next offseason that ended up happening before the start of the season. I'm going to have to go back through all of our records and figure that out. So I'm not ruling out the fact that, hey, maybe they agree on a number. I still don't think that number, they're going to find that number, because I think Cook's ask is too big. But I think he does show up. If I'm predicting this thing, I think he does show up. I think he has a lot of money to be made this season when he becomes an unrestricted free agent next year. I don't think the Bills are going to franchise tag him. I think it will be either finding a palpable number or letting him walk and bringing that comp pick compensation back.
Yeah, 100%. And it sounds like on both sides, Cook's going to eventually show up. He's going to play out the season. The Bills are going to, maybe even have good faith negotiations before the year, in season. They need to try to find that middle ground. But right now, it seems like, at least from a far view, that they're still far apart. There hasn't seemed to be any kind of traction there. Maybe there is some kind of breaking of the ice at training camp with Cook showing up. I anticipate he will be there, going back to the original question.
But at the same time, like, I don't know how much heat there is right now between the two
Right.
sides. Like, I don't get that sense based on all of his Brandon Beane's offseason comments. I mean, James Cook has been pretty mum on all of it and kind of maybe annoyed at times, but even still, most of the time, I don't get the sense that he's overly affected by it. Now that might just be his personality. We'll see.
Right.
We got a super chat here from Mark Bouchard. How much gasoline do you guys think has been added to James Cook's fire since the Derrick Henry extension signing last week?
I'm sure in his mind, it's what he wants. It's what he, feels like he deserves. But even at Henry's age, where he is obviously significantly older than Cook, he's a bell cow. He's a 3-down back. He's a workhorse. Not maybe to the extent that he was early in his Tennessee days or in the prime that he was, but you saw him with the Ravens. They'd give him some breathers here and there, but he was still getting the bulk of the carries. He was still out there when in those pivotal moments. Cook still doesn't have that element to his game, and I don't know if he ever will, and that's okay. You saw the breakaway speed, the ability to score touchdowns, the way he can factor into the passing game. It's just kind of apples and oranges, though, when you're comparing those two skill sets. Even with Henry being significantly older, the Ravens probably feel good. Like, okay, this guy's going to retire with us. That's probably going to be his last deal. We can handle giving him that kind of money based on his production from last year.
David asking, are you guys going to Atlanta for the road game? We are. Both of us booked. Trip is booked. We're currently canvassing locations for a Shout Live. So stay tuned for that. And if you have any ideas for that, a couple people have already reached out with some locations that we should reach out to. So we are in the planning stage of the Atlanta trip. So that'll be a fun one. Yeah, I think the money situation, last thought on James Cook, 2 years, $15 million per season extension for Henry. Comment here, 12 per season for Cook. He thinks is fair. That's Charles on YouTube. I think that 12 million, if that ends up being the number and the Bills were to resign Cook at that number one, it shows you what they think he means to their offense to put that kind of capital into that position. So I think that I would err on the side in terms of my reaction. Like, I personally wouldn't hit that number if I was negotiating with James Cook. To all the points that you just made, I don't feel comfortable in a league where you can find so much production at the position. And listen, I also think we're a little bit inflating James Cook to a degree when we're talking about what he's done in the league. Like, those 16 touchdowns to me changed so much for how people view James Cook. And I'm not downplaying how good he is. I think he's a really good player. But I think to go and entertain a 12 plus million per season offer at running back, you need to be one of those guys you're talking about, somebody that carries the load, like is somebody that you can lean on down in and down out. You're not going to take off the field late in games, and somebody that's like an irreplaceable part of your offense. Ryan, this might be a bold take. I think if you flipped the workload between James Cook and Ray Davis in 2025, this season, who's to say that Ray Davis doesn't put up similar numbers? And if you're the Bills, now you're in the driver's seat because he's entering year 3 in a cost-controlled contract. You can add potentially in the draft next year at the running back position again. I just think there's so many more options rather than hamstringing yourself with a big contract that gets you into, some hot water maybe in a year or two.
Yeah, and it's the touchdowns that I'm sure is what Cook and his agent are trying to factor into this new deal. But what was it? 2 rushing touchdowns the previous 2 years each. And then he explodes this past year with 16 on the ground, 2 through the air. If he had put up double-digit touchdowns, even combined his first 3 years, then maybe you could convince me he deserves a big money deal. But this one season is an outlier, whether we like it or not. It took until the final game of the season for him to get over 1,000 yards rushing because of the way the Bills rotate their backs to keep them fresh. This was not a monster season where he almost rushed for 2,000 yards. It's not a McCaffrey or a Henry type of situation. It's all based on one stat, the touchdowns, which more than impressive the way that he scored this past season, but it's a 1-year deal in terms of what he's done with that type of production.
Thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday night. You're listening and watching Shout, a Buffalo football podcast brought to you by the National Comedy Center out there in Jamestown, New York. This is not a traditional museum, Ryan. It's completely reimagining the museum experience with interactive exhibits and technology that personalize the experience for each visitor. The museum surrounds you with the best stand-up, sketch, improv, movie, and TV comedy, all things that make you laugh.
Yeah, unbelievable place. I used to go to Jamestown every year, a few times every year for the Gus Macker tournaments and Mean Gene's Burgers. But this is the reason to go to Jamestown now. It's the National Comedy Center, one stop for all your favorite comedy shows, comedians in terms of their stand-up acts, props from from TV shows, you name it, they'll have it at the Comedy Center. Cannot wait to get out there.
Shout out to David, who's just absolutely on fire in the chat. We will do an insider Zoom session pretty soon. And if you want to become an insider, we do so many different things. We had a series there for a while where we're bringing some insiders onto the podcast. We'll get that fired up at some point again soon. We do insider-only Zooms from time to time. Probably should do that on a more regular basis. Yeah. Answer questions one-on-one. And then also, I'm working on a little bit of a mailbag story this week. And I put a request out for questions, got a bunch back, and we're picking one today that we're going to spend the next few minutes here in a second. But if you want to become an insider, text 716-528-6727. Check it out. 2-week free trial, $3.99 a month after that. It's a great way to connect on a deeper level with myself and Mr. Talbot.
Yeah, awesome when we can respond back and forth with the insiders. Some great comments, questions, and points that they have raised all off season. Something definitely worth joining. Like Matt said, 2-week free trial, then $3.99 a month.
All right. So Davis, one of our many insiders with a great question. And I think from an off-season theme, this would be an interesting topic to spend 15 minutes on here. And what I want to do with a couple of these questions is we're going to break them out into their own segments on the show. And this one, I think, warrants a little bit of a conversation. Here's the question. When creating the final roster, which way do you think Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott lean this season? Veteran heavy or youth movement? Seems like we have young players with potential at a lot of positions and also veteran safe choices. I'm sure there will be some mix, but feels like this is both a season to win now, but also look towards the future. So you think about it, Ryan, quarterback, running back, offensive line, and linebacker. The Bills are basically running him back, right? Darrington Evans is in. They drafted Chase Lunt on the offensive line. Mm-hmm. At linebacker, I think they got a fringe guy. I don't have his name up in front of me. But for the most part, all of those position groups are coming back almost fully intact from last year. Where you see some dramatic change, wide receiver to a lesser degree, more so defensive line and cornerback. And those two groups specifically, I wanted to zero in on because on the defensive line, you have some veterans, right? Like Joey Bosa, Michael Hoyt, Larry Ogunjobi, kind of juxtaposed to Deion Walker, TJ Sanders, Landon Jackson, right? So you have 3 swings on veteran guys that can come in here and maybe refresh that group from an experience perspective, but also 3 brand new players that are going to be on rookie contracts for the next 4 years that you got to find a way to roster once you get to the final. And the one caveat I throw in there is maybe Deion Walker. If he has any issues with the back long-term over the summer, you can maybe, put him on IR to start the season or PUP or something like that. But that aside, you have some questions there. At cornerback, you double dip in the draft again, Maxwell Hairston, Dorian Strong, and then you double dip in free agency, bringing in Dane Jackson and Tre'Davious White. So the Bills are going to have some really important decisions as they whittle this thing down to 53. And we'll be doing that, I think on Monday. We're going to do Friday or Monday. I haven't decided exactly yet. But what are your first thoughts on these 2 positions, how you kind of set up the position battles, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes to the defensive line, when we're talking about the edge rushers, obviously I think they're going to lean heavily into Bosa in those meaningful downs, meaningful snaps. You have Rousseau opposite that. So I lean more of a veteran presence in terms of the starting position there. But what's going to be interesting is the depth. Landon Jackson being that third round pick, the Bills loved him, talked to him a lot. What's his role going to look like? Can he be one of the top reserves? Javon Solomon entering year 2. He did show some good bursts, some good pressures getting to the quarterback. Didn't finish the plays last year, but with the whole offseason, can he ascend and take that next step? Take advantage of Michael Hoyt's 6-game suspension, essentially, with that increased role. I think it kind of puts AJ Epinesa in this, I don't want to call it no man's land, but it puts him in a tough spot where the Bills know what they have in Epinesa, and it's not a bad thing. He's solid against the run. He makes some splash plays against the pass here and there. But it might be time to let some of these younger players off the edge ascend into at least those top depth roles on this team. So, Bosa and Rousseau, both veterans now at this point, although Rousseau is still very, very young. I do think, though, that's going to be a little bit of a youth movement off the edge when it comes to the top rotation options. What about you?
I think it's interesting on the edge spot because you're in a spot that even with a strong summer from Solomon, with Hoyt out for the first 6 weeks, you really are going to probably need to lean on AJ Epinesa just from a snap count perspective, right? You don't want to leave Joey Bosa out there on an island. You don't want to overwork Greg Rousseau. I mean, they don't want to ever be in a position where a guy that they're paying $20 million in Rousseau, who is really good in spurts and has had his big time moments. I don't think anybody is under the illusion that he needs to be out there for 80-90% of the snaps. So I think that puts AJ Epinesa in a very safe spot early in the season. I've seen some talk banted about maybe him being a trade target in training camp or the preseason. To me, if you're going to trade Epinesa, you're not even considering it until closer to the trade deadline. Like
right.
When you get Hoyt back, when you maybe see whether or not Javon Solomon's ready for a larger role, if Landon Jackson's ready to step into a larger role. But I do think the Bills can roster 10 defensive linemen, maybe even 11. And the interesting part of the math becomes you don't have to worry about Hoyt and Ogunjobi getting them over the hump. You can place them on the suspended list right at the end of the preseason. And those 2 spots, like a lot of times they were injured, you'd have to account for that, right? Put them in those IR spots. They would then take those 2 spots. I think they did that with a couple players last year, Milano being one of them. You got to put them over I think Quentin Morris might have been the other one. Put them over the 53-man roster cutdown day, and then they get to kind of go right to IR. You don't have to worry about that at all with Ogunjobi and Hoyt. So to me, that gives you the opportunity, despite what happens in preseason training camp, you're not going to have to necessarily cut anybody until you get into the season. I can't see a world where Solomon, I'll put him kind of on the outside, but where Dwayne Carter or AJ Epinesa or Deion Walker, any of these players aren't on that first initial 53.
No, absolutely not. But in terms of, how they fit into this roster, their roles, that's going to be the interesting thing to watch. Defensive tackle, no one's pushing Ed Oliver off the starting spot, but I don't think the Bills necessarily have a one tech to push Jones off of his starting roster spot, despite the decline. Deion Walker with the back injury, bringing him along slowly. Who knows if he's even ready to go by week 1 and what that looks like. I know the Bills were very high on him. TJ Sanders will be in a good spot to be the top reserve behind Ed Oliver. I know he can play a little bit of one tech, so I think there's going to be a role for him. But then you kind of look, and I thought Ogunjobi was brought in to push Dwayne Carter a little bit. Now he's suspended. So defensive tackle truly is up in the air. But there's a lot of youth there that are going to get opportunities, especially a guy like Sanders, who the Bills said would have been in play at pick 30 if Harrison had been off the board.
I see a comment here from somebody saying that with the $6.5 million savings on an Epinesa trade, that's too much to pass up, and that that'd be somebody that he would trade. And listen, I'm not saying that it's impossible, but just look at his last few seasons. Last year he played 55% of the snaps. He was somebody that was relied upon. I don't think that you can bank on Bosa coming in here or not only bank on him being able to play it, I don't think you should set him up in a situation where you have to ask him to play that much. And I'm just going off the history. I don't think the Bills generally trust young second round or young day 3 defensive linemen to take like a significant role on their line. Now, there's a bunch of different things. Like if they just feel like, hey, it's an easy first part of the schedule, maybe you want to deal AJ Epinesa, get something back, save the $6.5 million, and then lean on Jackson. Bosa could play a lesser role, and then hey, it's feast or famine for 6 weeks. Javon Solomon, this is your tryout period, right? They have some other pieces that I think that's maybe on their practice squad over the last couple of years. I don't have the roster up in front of me, but I could see that being a possibility. I'm just going based on how much they value the institutional knowledge piece, but maybe this specific position group, they'd be willing to kind of go off course a little bit with all the new brain power in that building.
Yeah, 100%. And I do think that now is a good time for the Bills to lean a little bit into a youth movement. You have enough veteran presence at key positions where I think this team would be okay if you're giving younger guys extended reps. And you don't just give it to them to give it to them. Sean McDermott has said that there's been this whole thing about how he's not against rookies, but doesn't like to play rookies. He's kind of came out and said recently, it's not because he doesn't like to play rookies. It's just there's a lot on their plate, and it's tough for them to be ready to play as rookies, depending on the position and the responsibilities for it. But when you look at some of these positions, whether it's starters or depth, I do think the Bills are going to lean a little bit into that youth movement. One position that you mentioned in terms of running it back was linebacker, which is 100% true. But I think the Bills are really depending on their youth to be the key depth for this team going forward, and not bringing in a Deion Jones or some of these other veterans that we've seen in years past where they're trying to hope that they can win a roster spot. I think that they have a lot of faith in Joe Andreessen to play a big depth role. Obviously, Dorian Williams being the top depth guy, but behind him, Andreessen and having Eddie Ulofoshio. I think they're leaning into it in certain spots, whether that be rookies, second-year, third-year guys, and I think now is the time to pivot to that.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important year for Dwayne Carter, but I just think that the way that this offseason has kind of played out, he's kind of positioned for a really good start to the season. I mean, if he gets going in a way that they're super happy with, TJ Sanders shows that he can be a valuable part of their rotation, things get interesting at defensive tackle with Deion Walker if he's able to play. We'll see how that back holds up once the games start, where he ends up going. But I've always maintained, back in free agency when they signed Larry Ogunjobi and the whole scandal about him getting suspended and how could Brandon Beane go through with this deal after learning about this. Just because you sign him to a 1-year deal doesn't mean that you can't deal him if you're in a good spot at defensive tackle. And let's be honest, you can never have enough talent at that position because there's so many injuries prevalent on defensive line, to the point where I think guys over the years have played in spots where they probably shouldn't have been because of the Bills' lack of depth. And so I think the more guys that you can kind of throw at the problem, the better off you'll be. I could see the Bills rolling with 10 defensive linemen all season long.
Yeah, we've seen over the years how they've been desperate at times for, defensive tackle last year. They didn't trade for any. But they're banged up. They didn't love their depth, so they bring back Jordan Phillips for what felt like his 8th return to the team. Quentin Jefferson for his 2nd return to the team. It's happened before our eyes and recently. So Ogunjobi, 6-game suspension. Yes, that's not ideal, but he's going to be fresh in the middle of that season. He's going to have his legs under him late in the year, and he's going to be most likely part of a key rotation come playoff time. So 1-year deal. Yes. If everyone else steps up, could they trade him? 100%. I'm in agreement with you on that. But I think maybe for an older veteran like Ogunjobi, this could be a silver lining, believe it or not, having this 6-game suspension.
Thank you so much for watching on this Wednesday night. I want to dip into the defensive backs room as well. We could kind of do it a 2-pronged approach. Somebody mentioned safety, and I think that's worth talking about because Derek Forrest, he's not a household name by any stretch, but we've talked a lot about him this offseason as like that sneaky veteran that's now being brought in that room. They bring back DeMar Hamlin. They have Cole Bishop, and they go out and they draft Jordan Hancock on day 3, who can potentially fill a safety role. But let's start at cornerback, because there's almost like this. I mentioned the 2 for 2. There's also the current version of Dane Jackson that's been on this roster the last couple of years, and that's Jamarcus Ingram, right? Like, he could play a hybrid amount of roles. He could do multiple things. But I think what he's been used for the most over his tenure is boundary corner. He's somebody that I think if he doesn't make the team, can probably be brought back on the practice squad. We'll see. Maybe there's people out there, or there's teams out there that value what he does and maybe want to bring him on. I think Dorian Strong, I will give fans a little bit of a warning on the Dorian Strong offseason hype train that I feel like is about to commence. Christian Benford is a very, very special case, right? Like, I'm high on Dorian Strong. I like all of the intangibles, talking to him, watching him out on the practice field the other day. But to find another Christian Benford would be like getting hit by lightning for Brandon Beane, right? Like, I mean, those kinds of hits at that position, especially boundary corner in the 6th round, they're very rare. I mean, he'd have to be called the GM cornerback whisperer if Dorian Strong ends up being a legit starter. He's got a lot of things standing in his way, because he got 3 veterans, like I mentioned, Dane Jackson, Ingram, and Tre'Davious White, ahead of him on the depth chart, right? He's going to get a chance to play a lot in the preseason, which gives him an opportunity. But I think that it's going to be, you're going to have to earn it. You're going to have to really prove that you could be trusted in that 3rd or 4th cornerback spot to really beat out some of these veterans. And I don't know if I'm setting up this battle off the jump, if I'm just there yet. I haven't seen enough.
No, and that's fair. And I think he probably beats out Ingram. A guy like Ingram, Cam Lewis, those are the players that have been on this roster for a few years in the defensive back room, where I do wonder if they're going to make this roster or have a spot on this roster. It's going to be tough this year. But Strong, where he fits into this puzzle is going to be interesting, because, as you mentioned, I think we all think, obviously, Benford, cornerback 1, but I think we're all expecting Hairston to be the starter opposite Benford, most likely. 1st round pick. They love everything about his game. If they don't feel like he's ready, maybe not, but that's what I'm anticipating. For the backups, though, it's going to be very tough to beat out Dane Jackson and Trey White because of their knowledge of the system. The fact that a guy like Dane Jackson specifically, he didn't have the intangibles, he didn't have the speed, but he fit the system, and he was never out of position. And I know fans probably roll their eyes at that saying, because we've talked about that with DeMar Hamlin over the years and other players where they're not the flashiest, they're not the most athletic, but they know their role and they do it well. That's tough to beat out on a roster, especially now when you're talking about a depth role. So in terms of youth versus going with veterans, I think for the outside depth, you're going to see the veterans get a lot of run there. Dorian Strong, as the year goes on, midway point of the season, late in the year, could I see him bumping one of those 2 guys? Yes. Early on, I'm right there with you, though. It's not easy to get a day 3 type of player in the starting lineup or near the starting lineup, top of the depth chart on more than one occasion. I know they got very lucky with Benford that year, but Strong, as the year goes on, because of his fit in this system, I could see him making a push up the depth chart, but early on, I'm expecting it to be the 2 vets on the outside.
I think there's a very good chance Dane Jackson doesn't make the 53, and the Bills are confident they can get him back on the practice squad, because it went so bad in Carolina for him. Part of it was injury, but when he was on the field, it wasn't very good. And so I think, like, I thought he was grossly overpaid, and that's coming from somebody that has been probably higher on Dane Jackson than most, but I never thought he was like a $6-7 million corner, right? Like, I thought he was, I thought he'd face a similar situation to or to DeMar Hamlin, right? Hit the free agent market, end up having to sign for about $2 million, $3 million per season. Prove it one more year, just because as a day 3 guy, he had some really good moments, but there was also some stretches where he struggled quite a bit. So I thought that, but I always think teams are going to pay more for premium positions at cornerback. So if you think that you can get a hit there, Dan Morgan, I think, was a part of the staff that scouted him, maybe hired on him the most. But I don't think if he doesn't make the team and that you got to try to get him back on the practice squad, that's going to be a super challenge at this stage of his career. Push back, please.
Well, I could see it. I just don't see him not making this roster. I think he's going to be corner in terms of outside cornerbacks. I don't want to ignore Taron Johnson, who's obviously a key.
That's okay. Let's just have the boundary corner.
Right. But for boundary corners, I just think that Dane Jackson might have more in his tank right now than Trey White. So I don't think Trey White's necessarily at risk of not making this roster, but I think Dane's in a better spot because of the age, because of the because of the the injury history with Trey White and all that. I think Dane's going to be in a good spot to claim one of those top depth roles on the boundary. Fit does matter. I know Jordan Poyer in terms of I don't know, I'm changing a completely different player in position here, but he recently talked about Miami and why it didn't work out. And he said a part of it was the system. I think it's also the age, and I think he's starting to slow down a little bit too, but fit matters. And we've seen Dane Jackson in this defense. And the Bills trusted him a few years ago to play a large role for this team. Taking it back now to cornerback 3, cornerback 4, I think they would absolutely be comfortable with that.
The one thing that gives me pause on Trey and why I will lean into or agree with what you were just saying about just the injury history, you don't hear Sean McDermott talk too much about players like, I don't know, like, I don't want to say like not their injury history, but just like their ability to play after injuries. And he said one thing, I think it might have been on the Eric Wood podcast a couple weeks ago, where he's like, I've never seen a player come back from the 2 injuries that Trey White had and be the same guy. Mm-hmm. But he added that if anybody was going to be able to do it, he'd put his money on it being Trey. And I just think that there's so much to be said for, I think we're getting a clear look at the best version of Trey that's left in camp, right? So we'll get a chance over the first couple of weeks to really dive into that and see if he's at any semblance of the place that he used to be. And I think a lot of that is like, if he can't be, you have so many options. I think that's the one good thing that Brandon really did this offseason in a couple of positions that he had to address was he went a bunch of different ways with a bunch of different flavors so that when they get to this point, if one doesn't work, if 2 don't work, well, there's option 3, 4, and 5 too.
Yeah. What's behind door number 2 or 3? Absolutely. They have that now. I agree with you on that. So there's the unknown with Trey White. I think we're both right there in agreement on that. We don't know what's left in the tank. We don't know if he can become the same player. I will say there were some good reps from his Baltimore tape versus his Rams tape that I thought was disastrous at times. So maybe it is just a whole matter of getting comfortable, the getting used to playing, pivoting, cutting, all that stuff that maybe he was a little hesitant to do with the Rams. He was more comfortable doing late in the year with the Ravens, and he'll feel comfortable doing it here in Buffalo. But I'm still concerned at the end of the day in terms of what he can do, what he can bring. The veteran leadership 100% would be unbelievable for Max Hairston. Obviously, Benford would love to have him there as well, or back there in the regular season to pick his brain on things. So that is what he brings to the table, if nothing else. But you need some semblance of Trey being Trey on the field too.
Well, we have been going at this for almost 50 minutes, Ryan Talbot. I think we're going to call it a night. You could tell it's baseball season. I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit. It's that time of year. Boys got off to a good start this past weekend, and now it's just going to rain for our whole lifetime. Every single day I'm looking at the weather. It looks like it's going to rain. We're playing a tournament this weekend. That could be really challenging. But finally, before we get out of here, head up to the National Comedy Center. do not wait. Jamestown, New York is Lucille Ball's hometown, and the National Comedy Center is based on her vision for her hometown to be a destination for the art form of comedy. Just 3 blocks away, the Lucille Ball Desi Arnaz Museum celebrates the lives, careers, and legacy of the first couple of comedy and the incredible impact they had on the world. The museum tells the story of I Love Lucy and DeLuca Studios, which not only produced Lucy's show, but also the original Star Trek and Mission Impossible. Ryan, we cannot wait to get to the National Comedy Center soon.
Pumped to get there, Matt, and it is as legit as it comes. Best new museum from USA Today. Time's world's greatest places to visit. You name it, they're getting the accolades, and they well deserve it.
All right, that'll do it for this week's episode. We'll see you all later. Make sure you sign up to become an insider, 716-528-6727. Just drop us a line, ask a question, say hello, whatever you're feeling like, and enjoy the rest of your week.